Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Happy webinar podcast day today. I was looking forward to this one for a while.
Oh, same here. I think it's gonna be, I know it's gonna be great. I see people
We
slowly.
sent the note out to everyone to say like block off 2 or 3 hours just in case because of the depth of conversation I'm preparing for today. Did that
Fantastic.
did that go out or no or no?
Well, it's a good excuse for everybody to miss their next meeting or whatever. They
Yeah,
had to
yeah,
stay on.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. No, we're joking. It's gonna be 45, like or an hour. We'll keep it to an hour for everyone, but
mhm.
yeah, it could be easily 2 to 3 hours. I think with
Easy.
the chatter and guests we've got with us today.
Exactly. And I mean, it doesn't take, I mean, if anybody's read one Nancy Drew novel, you can kind of see that there's two similar last names on this
Oh,
webinar.
yeah,
Doesn't take
yeah,
a professional detective to know that we're related, and I'm really excited to have my mother on, actually, who is such an expert in her field. So we'll get into that in a little while. But you can also see that I'm wearing all white and I look like a floating head, which will be hopefully not too distracting for everybody. Somebody earlier had said that it was kind of like very angelic. So I like the
yeah. There you go. That's a good one. The
exactly.
holidays. Yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, it's how is everything else going in your world?
I'm back in Toronto. I
Oh, nice.
anybody who's been following the webinar, if this is your fourth one, or this is our third one, sorry, this will be my third place, I think. So I was in Argentina last time. Now I'm back in Canada for the holidays,
Nice.
and then I jet off on January 2nd. So I will see you from a new country
Oh,
come
perfect. We'll get the
January,
update
whatever.
for it's almost like everyone's can be playing like where is Olivia bingo tracker on
Exactly.
the on their cards at home.
Oh my goodness. I feel like people the rolling in has slowly started to taper off. I'm sure we'll kind of get a few more in a bit, but I know Jesse, today you and I were and our special guests were talking about well, the title is Fostering Meaningful Work. That's what we'll be talking about, aligning organizational values and employee engagement and all of that. Which is exciting. I think that's going to be great.
Mhm.
Now, before we bring everybody on, is there I know that you also have some coaching sessions and you're in the field, quote unquote, a
Yeah.
lot. Anything you want to use to like set the stage for us before we dive in?
Yeah, I know this is an interesting one for me. I think it's one that like really hits me personally, and not having even thought about it until this moment. I think about Nicole has been a person who's been a person to help guide and support, as well as like invite me in. We'll call it on my shit in the journey of like finding. To me, when I think of meaningful work, I think very closely to fulfillment. And on the other side, I've had the benefit and privilege of even working with Eleanor as like someone who's been able to be the Nicole in that relationship. I guess you could you could say if I was to take an advantaged statement. But I why I say that is, and it's funny. I was actually having this conversation with someone last night. I felt that for me personally, like there was a point in my life where you could look at the things that were happening. We've got 3 kids. We have a beautiful house just outside downtown Halifax. We do boating. We have cottages. We have a lot of really great things. And I remember sitting with a close friend a few years ago. This would have been not last summer, the one before, saying, "Hey, if we were here in a year, what would we be celebrating?" And the thing for me at that moment that I shared was finding fulfillment, and what that was about was integrating the things I want in life, the person I want to be, the work I get to do, which then put me on this journey to really examine Ember's purpose, what we're here for, how we want to show up to environments, how what am I needing to do, exploring some really critical feedback, with people like Nicole around race and privilege and maleness, all these different kind of conversations. It really, stemmed out of some reflection I was going through for the last few years. So for me, I think it's a really critical conversation that I see when I get to work with leaders, where I hear it often, like, I started this work, I really cared about the thing I was doing, and now I woke up, from being in like a sleep almost 10 to 15 years later, and I don't even know who I am or why I'm doing this thing, or the like what's going on. I don't recognize myself. And I think a lot of that has to do with where we become disconnected with the ideals we hold for ourselves, the values what we think is important, and the ways in which we're going to move for the world. So the beliefs we have on how to do it. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation because I don't think you'll come across two people that haven't deeply reflected on those types of things, explored it through the sense of like a cultural pressures and nuances, and came out, and not to share their story fully, but came out in a different place. So and then also really seeing the tangible impacts that can be had as a leader that's deeply connected with their own values, in terms of fostering culture, engagement, psychological safety inside of an organization. So yeah, I'm just eager to get going. So maybe I'll stop talking and let you introduce our guests, and we can get rolling.
Yeah, I think this would be great. In the shortest of bios, because I know that you've all seen their extensive ones, I'm sure. But so Nicole Stibbe, who I hope not to call mom during this, she is the principal and founder of Soul Work Alliance, an equity, diversity, and inclusion consultancy based in Toronto. And she has over 25 years in the corporate space as a leader, mentor, trainer, strategic advisor to organizations of all sizes. So lots of insight, which I'm excited about. And Nicole, if you want to go ahead and turn on your camera for us. Fantastic. Nice to see your face. And Eleanor, she has extensive experience in the education industry, including as vice principal, principal education officer, and is currently the superintendent of education with the Halton District School Board. Incredible. Oh, welcome. Thank you both for being here. I know that Jesse kind of gave his own insight into your relationships and his journey as well. And based on what he said, is there anything that comes top of mind? Maybe you want to comment on your relationship with Jesse and how you put him in his place all the time, or if there's anything like that. But yeah, before we dive into the actual questions, yes, what's top of mind for you, Nicole? Do you wanna start?
Oh, wow. I could tell so many stories about Jesse, but I won't. Obviously Jesse and I, we always kind of chat about how we go way back. But we have some, pretty deep conversations. And I think what's top of mind for me right now, though, is I think just where we are as humans and society. And I kind of always wonder, what does the future of work look like? How much
Mm,
can we do? I just got off a call with a leader in an organization, and we were just kind of joking, but it's not really a joke. It's, we joke about how 10 years ago we thought we were busy, and now look at us, we're even more busy. And it makes me a little nervous with kind of that future of work and what does that look like? And a lot of organizations who are really, focusing and pushing, the profits and productivity. And what's on my mind is, how do we prioritize humanity alongside productivity? Is that even possible? So, and how can we redefine society's definition of success?
mm,
So that's running through my mind a lot lately. I don't know if I'll ever get the answer to that, but that's what's top of mind for me right now.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we'll explore that a little bit more with some of the later questions. But Eleanor, what about you?
Yeah, thanks. I think that what's top of mind for me, this comes on the heels of a conversation I had yesterday when I was in a school doing a visit with a principal. And we were talking about this whole concept of work, particularly as it pertains to the younger workforce who's coming into education in particular, really trying to grapple with commitment, work ethic, and what that looks like for teachers coming into very challenging times in public education. The way that education looks now is very, very different than it was certainly when everybody on this call perhaps was in school, but also, the student looks very different now. And the conditions of work look very different, particularly on the heels of COVID and the pandemic. And so we were really kind of chatting about, expectations and where is the line? Where is, the allowance for grace for people to accommodate or do things differently in the workplace, show up in different ways in the classroom. And, that really gave me a lot of pause when we were talking, because we're struggling to maintain a workforce right now in education that is stable, that is engaged, and that is responsive to the things that are happening in the classroom and the way that the communities that we serve are changing. And there's this reticence a lot of times for people to not want to participate in a way that we need them to, because it rubs against kind of what they see and what they feel is important in their life at that time. So, it was an interesting conversation that we got into. Don't have an answer in terms of where this will land for the younger folks who are coming into the profession. But I think it's very timely given our conversation today around values and what that means for people who are coming into the workforce.
Mm. Yeah, that's really deep. And I'd agree, like having opportunity to work in facilitating planning activities with school boards and inside of culture. Like I see, even just in personal conversation, you see really charged dynamics in talking about things that might matter inside of the school environment, what you should and should not do,
Yeah.
and it's super interesting to also think through like how much of that is stemming from a fear of uncertainty and these things. And you even said something about like the criticality of values. I guess maybe before we get going too far, I loosely gave a frame, but I'd be curious to you, both of you, how do you think about values and what they mean to you personally? Maybe we'll start with you, Nicole, and then we'll go to you, Eleanor.
Yeah, it's such a great question, right? And I even as you had asked me to join this session, I really had to kind of think about what are our values. I think we use that term, we use purpose, we use values, and it's really difficult to define. And I think for me personally, it's difficult because my values, I feel, have changed over time. I think, because our values for me are, kind of they're framed by, our cultural background, our family and whatnot. And for me, they've changed over time. There was a time where values to me meant, kind of strength, I was raised to be, a strong Black woman and make sure that, you don't show any, fear, you don't show any emotion. And also, kind of in the corporate space and where I worked for so many years, you have to push ahead. You have to be a leader. There's a glass ceiling for me. It's thicker because of the color of my skin. It's thicker for my daughters because of the color of their skin. And you've got to push through. And I think some of that defined my values. And I've noticed they've changed over time. And I've really had to kind of sit with what are my values and what does values mean to me? And for me, they are my guiding principles now. They're my guiding principles. They help shape my decisions and my relationships and my actions. They serve as, kind of a foundation for how I live, and how I operate and how I fit in with the people around me. I have my personal values as well, and I try to live by them every day. But it's really been a journey, and I'm still on this journey. I think the values that I have today, my guiding principles, my compass, my North Star, they may shift in a year. Who knows? But it really is, for me, it's where I want to go. It's that North Star. It's that compass for me.
What are some of the ones that got updated that you've updated to now?
So my values right now are integrity, authenticity, compassion, and optimism. Those are the ones that I stand by. I think, if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, it probably would have been, strength and power and, all of these things that I think society really told me I needed in order to be successful in what I do. And I was successful. I climbed a corporate ladder. But I didn't like that ladder that I was on. I don't like, when people kind of climb these ladders that are built on how much money and how much success do you have. So it shifted for me. And I think, I'm chuckling, as I look at Olivia. I think even, that compassion, even as a parent, is much more evident now than it would have been 10 years ago or 5 years ago.
Mm. Would you say that's true, Olivia?
I would. I think it's also interesting because I feel like I would say that I've also noticed a shift in values, which has just been really interesting. Because I feel like you radiate them as well. And like if you
Mm.
talk to like any mentor or any person kind of in your life and whatever values they follow, I feel like they start to seep into you, and to see the shift not only within my mom, but also any mentors that I've had or teachers or professors or bosses, whatever, whatever their guiding principle, whatever their North Star is, kind of gets infused into me as well. So it's kind
Mm.
of nice to see the shift and also wholeheartedly embody them myself willingly. It's been
Mm.
nice. Yeah.
I think there's something so beautiful about the opportunity to have like really vulnerable and conversations like this that aren't always had at a dinner table. And I think they're ones, it's like, why aren't we having them? And because I'm curious with such an intimate relationship, being mother and daughter, and although different contexts, different behaviors, but I see such similarities within leader staff dynamics in terms of impact, power, that kind of stuff. What's the impact for you in that shift, Olivia, to put you on the spot?
The impact, and I wait, when you say impact, what do you mean by that?
Like in the shift that your mom went through around re-examining
Oh,
her values from something different to something now, like, and living
yeah.
it. So I love how you use the term, like it's just something you radiate as you move through the world versus like a curated thing. And what's the impact of that for you that it has?
I really don't like this word, but I'm gonna have to use empowered. I feel like because I've been able to see her take on these values and succeed in such a different path than I think we were raised to expect. So, we were kind of like pensions and becoming VP or whatever, which is all good and well. But then being able to really just like follow, like take on optimism, follow your heart, follow your what feels good,
Mm.
and be guided by whatever your North Star is. It's just been really nice to feel empowered to take such a random route that I have, because I used to be in the corporate space, of course, and I've kind of,
Mm.
for our watchers, I'm an author and a writer and I'm traveling. Like this is something that I never expected, but to have my parents' values shift and kind of take those on myself, it just made me feel like I can do it, and actually
Mm.
find success in those.
Mm.
Mhm.
Eleanor, for you, when you think about values, how does it connect to achievement and success? Like, I like the idea, I think we're in an altruistic, like I feel so privileged to have observed the interaction and vulnerability between Olivia and Nicole, that they were sharing about living the values. And I also recognize that we live in a world sometimes where like, hey, that's great, but like really, what are we talking about? Like I want I want this outcome or this success. So I'm wondering for you, as you've gone through your own journey in a similar fashion, possibly, like how does it connect to achievement and success when you think about values?
It's a great question. I think that it really comes down to how we define success for ourselves in society, because I think sometimes those two things can be disparate, sometimes they can be aligned for different people. It doesn't mean that you are following the traditional path, a normalized path. It doesn't mean that you are, you know, um, playing on your experiences that you've had and really um, moving in a way that aligns, like with actions that'll really align with who you are and what you believe. Because I think that depending on the body that you live in, that can look different, that will look differently for
Mm.
different people. um,
Mm.
you know uh, you might be accepted in a very different way, and your success might be celebrated in a very different way than myself, for example, where that success might be defined differently for me by others, might be
Mm.
defined differently for me because of my experiences coming along. But in the end, I think that for me, over time, there's been a lot of clarity in terms of you know, as I've gotten older, as I've had experiences, both personal and professional, that have shaped the way that I've defined myself and defined my actions. I think that that has really garnered me a very clear pathway to what I want for myself as success, and what that those benchmarks of achievement look like for me. You know, I think that over time, similar to what Nicole talked about, that, you know, she's gotten clarity over the years in terms of what her values are, and they've shifted over time. I would say the same thing, because the experiences that I've had, that I've held on to, have really caused me pause, caused me to redefine or rethink about, you know, what I want for myself and the kinds of successes that I want for myself. And then how I approach that based on the values that I have, like integrity, or service, or humility. You know, when those things come, when we're faced with challenges or clashes to those values, when they're presented to us, you know, we have to decide how we're going to engage. And ultimately, the actions that we decide to take are going to define success and achievement out of that. Right?
Yeah, when I think about what you're sharing there, like I feel some of that comes from shifting the focus, and not that you ignore it, but shifting the focus from all the things around me that are either giving me a praise, approval, validation, or rejection, to what am I want within myself. And then I find what people do is, it's almost like driving on the highway. Like if you know you're going from Toronto to Ottawa, you can decide, oh, here's an exit for this road. I want to get off, meaning like the input from others are giving you a piece of information that you can choose to exit on and maybe explore a little bit, or you can keep on your route to, you know, the highway to Ottawa. And, you know, it's, and I recall even within some of our exploration that we got the opportunity to do with one another, even asking yourself, like, this thing that we really valued in past, it served us in many really effective ways and got us the success we got today. And I think sometimes we feel, in re-examining our values, we hold like shame in that, like, oh, now if I'm changing, I'm not good enough, versus no, we actually, there was benefit that I got from this. The better question is it going to serve me as I move forward into the next phase of where I want to go? And it may or may not. And I think those in itself sometimes become barriers for people, where you get stuck because it's like, you know, you're holding on to something and feeling, if I was to reevaluate it, means I was wrong, or I wasn't good enough, or whatever. And I don't think that's necessarily the case always. I think sometimes with context, information, all these things change. Like I love Malcolm Gladwell's work, where he's regularly writing books that counter other books he wrote, and his whole perspective on it. It's like, if I'm not changing my thinking, I'm not growing and evolving and enhancing myself as a person.
And I, yeah, you're right. And I think that in that, you know, when you talk about, you know, the barriers that sometimes we place on ourselves, depending on what we want to listen to, who we want to listen to, and what information they're sharing. Because, you know, the source of those relationships and how much we take that in, I think also plays an impact in terms of where we want to go, or the kinds of changes that we might make. You know, if I'm taking feedback from a close friend or a counterpart, or someone that I really hold in high regard, I might carry that thinking very differently than if I'm getting or receiving unsolicited feedback from someone else about something that happened, who I may or may not hold in high regard, or who may have some kind of power over me, perhaps, and if it's a, you know, from my professional life, right? So I think those things also play a factor in kind of where we go and how we decide, you know, what we want to do with that information in terms of how it will help or advance us or not.
Yeah. And the last thing, just on the values, because again, I feel like I'm sure you had the same experience, Nicole, but with Eleanor, I was able to observe some of it. And I remember, like, as we were evaluating, there was like ideas of like, is this what it should be? And then to me, there's this feel of when you find it, it just hits you in your body. It's like, it's my identity. Like, it's something within me. And I know this, we didn't necessarily, but I'm just curious, like, can you share some insight as to that process even, and even like then as well, the impact, and Nicole, feel free to jump in as well, of like, taking time to examine it and rediscover what those values are in terms of being authentic to you.
Was that to me? Was that to
Yeah,
me?
so if you start us
I'm
off,
sorry.
sorry, and then if
Okay.
Nicole has something to add in, you feel free.
Yeah, so, in terms of, looking at myself, and finding my purpose, I think that's where you're going with the question. Um, I think that the alignment between those, my own personal values and the things that I really want to aspire to, really can inform or impact, and have impacted, I will say, have impacted me both positively and negatively in the things that I have made decisions about, or the way that I make decisions in my both my personal life and my work life. But I think where it has really had the most impact for me has been on the work side. I think that I often say that one of the things that I do when I enter the workplace and I'm trying to find that fulfillment for myself is I'm really grounded in humility, and really wanting to give space and credence to as many perspectives as possible, and listen and take that information in to decide how it is that I'm going to advance or make a decision or make my next move. And that has, I think, really allowed me to gain perspective and hear other voices when we oftentimes don't necessarily do that,
Mm,
right?
mm, mm. It's almost like the willingness to explore new information and then
100%.
having it integrate into still yourself, and not feel as if by exploring this information, I'm giving myself up
Yeah.
to this other person winning or losing. I think that's a really, really insightful reflection. Um, Nicole, when you think about inside of a workplace setting, because you and I have been on many terms of this, both in terms of our own experience of having opportunity of working together in the corporate setting, where I would suggest we were maintaining an image of it in a certain way that we've explored in past. And then also in helping organizations examine their values and live up, how well are they living up to these things. But when you think about inside of a corporate setting, what are some of the barriers that people struggle with, or might get in place in front of them as they try to figure out the connection between personal values and organizational values?
Yeah, and I think, those barriers, they could be different for different people, different groups of people. I often see some organizations discouraging diverse perspectives. And we have to allow people the space to honor their personal values. And I don't think we do enough of that in organizations.
Mm,
Expressing personal values, it adds depth, it adds creativity. Sometimes when we're not allowed to express our personal values. And again, I don't want to talk about the extremes, because obviously we have protections for human rights and all of those wonderful things. So we're not talking about the extremes, but just how I'm allowed to show up in workplaces, and am I allowed to express my personal values? And sometimes there's a lot of barriers in preventing me from doing that. There's sometimes a lack of clarity. Organizations may fail to clearly communicate their values and how they translate into actionable goals. I've seen that a number of
mm,
times. I'm sure you've seen that a number of times, Jesse, as well.
mm,
Sometimes we have these superficial initiatives that undermine trust and authentic alignment. That could be another barrier. Sometimes there's a mismatch between organizational practices and their stated values. We see that so many times. Like, how many
mm,
times, Jesse, have
mm.
you and I have even worked in organizations, right? Where,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
these lovely values listed somewhere, but there is one or two or even groups of toxic people who continue to do well in the organization because they're bringing in, great sales, and they have, good client relationships. So somehow the values don't align to them anymore. And I think, another barrier is, when we have leaders that They may fail to model or reinforce organizational values. But I think one of the ones that is key for me, because I think, I experienced it, and I think a lot of people who may not be part of the dominant group experience it, and sometimes it's a little bit of an elephant in the room, right? Employees may hesitate to speak up and share their own values because they differ from the dominant group values.
Mm,
And that one's a tough one, because it goes almost against your core. And
mm.
you don't feel great, right? You don't feel great. And that leads to a whole host of other challenges.
But it almost speaks to me, within like the hiring or selection process, the idea of like culture fit. And
Mm.
that was such a prevalent theme for a long time in HR practices. And I think there's some benefits and well-intentioned things to it, but what you end up getting in many cases is almost you're hiring the person that looks and acts and feels like you, and that's culture fit because we kind of
Mm.
feel the same, and then you siphon off from that.
Yeah,
um
I always get a little nervous when I hear organizations talking about culture fit. Even though, they think they are protecting, because I have heard people express that they're protecting the candidate or the person, from, kind of their organization if they don't fit into the culture. Well, yeah, I think we have to re-examine why we feel we need to protect people from the culture of our organization. What's going on in our organization? But we really need to focus on culture add. We need to
mm,
look at everybody's personal values and how they align and welcome them into organization. We need to find
mm,
inclusive alignment and somehow balancing organizational values with inclusivity, to attract
mm,
that talent and to encourage people to express their personal values. I think one thing that I don't think we do enough of, we need to, and we always, there's always anti-bias training and all of those wonderful things, but we do need to do whatever we can to avoid bias in our hiring practices, in everything we do in organizations. And we need to make sure we're not prioritizing comfort over competence. And
Mm.
I think
mm.
sometimes we love that comfort. We love that comfort as
Yeah.
organizations.
Yeah, I guess like you're speaking to an interesting point where you can get some unintended consequences if you're unaware in hiring for culture fit, for organizational values, the intersection of EDI. And I'm wondering, Eleanor, from your experience, either in as a senior individual
Mhm.
inside your organization or being on the other side of hiring, or even think about the school dynamic where culture fit is really evolving. um, what are the things you feel are critical to be aware of as you're trying to really find? Because I think most people are trying their best to do well, is what I like to believe. Like when you talk about the optimism, that doesn't always translate to the experiences we have. But what do you think are the things that are really critical to be aware of? As we recognize that culture fit is going to be almost established by the dominant norm of representation in a given setting.
Yeah, I think that we have to be really careful about, optics and climbing with the rising times. I think when we came out of back in 2020, when post George Floyd, we saw an uprising in all of practices of equity statements and establishing departments and roles for people to come in. But you have to be careful, I think, around that, because if we look today where much of that work is, it's either gone by the wayside or it didn't really have a lot of uptake. And I think in part to that is because there wasn't really an establishment of core principles and understandings about what the organization believed around different values, diverse perspectives coming into the workplace, right? And the detriment
Mm,
of that is that when you take these approaches that can be seem as tokenistic, really, you're not actually getting to exercise the impact of practices and policies that might be in place in order to really shift the organization, because the organization itself didn't have the readiness, if you will, or the foundation, if you will, in order to participate in much needed dialogue, activities that will bring about the changes that are needed when you start to bring people into those roles. And then on the other side of that too is the impact to people who take on those roles, right? Because oftentimes people will hire and bring people in and establish departments without having really good, strong activities for retention. And it can be really difficult when you are one, two of a particular identity population in an organization, and you don't have, and layered on that are lots of expectations of change without those foundations that have been done by people before in that time. And so the impact to the individual often is that they feel this pressure to perform and to succeed, where we wouldn't put those expectations on other people, but we do in this case. And then they often they underperform, and they can't demonstrate impact in the way that we want them to. And so they leave, right? Or they don't end up doing the work that we need them to. So that's one consequence, I think, of not being able to, enter an organization or be in organizational spaces that have done that work. And I've seen that multiple years in education, where we have, the ministry or the government, implements a particular policy, for example, around equitable hiring, right? And we all want to diversify our workforce. But what is the actual work that has been done within the space in order to ensure that we are grounded in understandings that will allow us to make those shifts that are necessary? And then in that too, with people who, when you start to really do this work in organizations, people who are in the organizations have to be willing, I think, in my opinion, from the work that I've done, they have to be willing to let go of something and let go of understandings or ideas that they may have held on to for years. And how willing are they to do that? And why should they do that? Right? And if people don't understand that, then you're going to have this tension that continues to build in an organization. And ultimately, we don't see leverage that's happening out of that.
Can I just add to that? Because I think it's such an interesting point, Eleanor, when you say, people have to kind of unlearn. I think sometimes we put unrealistic expectations on, kind of organizations and structures as a whole, because, to your point, a lot of work was done in the EDI space, post George Floyd. But with these quick expectations of outcomes.
Yes.
And when we're asking people to change and we're asking people to reevaluate their values, because, some people's views of others and differences comes from, a lot of established values that they may have had through their religion or, their culture or their family. And, all of a sudden we're saying, oh, we need this now. We're expecting this of you. But we're not giving people the space. And back to your, the why, we're not giving people the why. People need some time to reevaluate. It's hard. It's hard losing your values, or, thinking, oh my gosh, my values may be misaligned here, or they're wrong. And we need to make sure we're giving people that space and grace to move through those feelings. And I often find we do things so quickly, and it's like we're dropping this next initiative. Oh, it's EDI or it's cultural change or whatever it could be. And oh, we're going to implement this in the next 6 months. It's not going to work. We have to figure out where people are in their own journeys and give them the tools and resources and their own personal why. And I just feel sometimes we don't give enough time for that.
Or intentionality. For that matter, right? We don't make it intentional at all, right?
I'm hearing a lot of it requires the intentional space. Like, it's not something you can just announce into effect, because now you've set like a new referential, and the evidence in which people have collected for whatever number of years is suggesting something different. So you're already starting at like a down. And I always come to the words, like, for me, when thinking about this change, is like, find the consistency over the intensity. And I do feel, and this isn't blaming any individual organization, we so often go for the intensity, like the big glamorous post, all the things, and then it's just left with nothing to hold it up underneath. The one thing I do want to maybe explore for a minute, because I feel as if, as you've said things a few times, both of you, around values. One thing I'm wondering if I see it differently slightly is I look at it, values are what you think's important, and I look at beliefs are how do you live up to what you think's important. So to me, although yes, you can re-examine values, I think those become a little bit more implanted and strong. So for example, one of my values is find ways to amplify others. I have a set of beliefs on how to do that, like whether it's through coaching conversations, questions, different tactics and behaviors I think are the best way to do so. However, I also need to accept in my commitment to the things I think are important, it's possible my beliefs are wrong. And I think so often in these conversations, we center beliefs on how you should do it versus centering the outcome you really want. And what I see happens often, because of the fixation on beliefs, we actually start to do behaviors that are become counter to the thing we actually believe is important, because the context, all these things have changed. And so you can no longer actually do the same way of operating. And I just, I think there's some of that rigidity, there's some of that fear, and that to me requires time and space to explore and even re-examine the things I believe important. Because I would argue, like as you said, you move from power to integrity. Well, what might be the difference in there other than the assumption I'm making of like aggressive type of holding? But isn't someone with integrity holding power? Like, so it's like, is it really then the behaviors that have been re-examined, the decisions that are making, like and again, coming back to that beliefs? I don't know if either of you have a quick reaction to that frame of reference that I laid down, either agreeing or disagreeing. I'd love to hear where you sit with that.
I think I actually need to give it more time and more thought, Jesse, to be quite honest, because I think part of me, one, because
It's
you
not
always
supposed to happen in a
yeah,
quick
you always kind of
podcast.
throw out
What are you
these,
talking about?
yeah, these philosophical ideas, and I'm like, and then 4 days later, I'm still thinking about it. I don't know, like I think what comes back to me is that with that time and space, whether it's beliefs or values or whatever it
Yeah,
is, I think, where does the strength come in there to move away from something that is so inherent in us? And I guess, to kind of layer on top of that, sometimes I wonder, and it's only because, of my own journey and the journey that I've helped some other people through, specifically, Black university and college students, as I kind of coach them into corporate spaces. Um, I think sometimes there could be a lot of privilege involved in
mm,
moving yourself past your beliefs or your values, or because I think some people have the ability to do that quite quickly,
yeah,
and they have a comfortable environment to do that quite
to do
quickly,
so. Yeah,
but not everybody has that. So I think that's what comes up for me when I was listening to you
yeah.
say that.
I heard a great quote actually the other day. It was from a guy I follow quite a bit, Mo Gadet, and he had said, almost by the very nature in which we can sit and explore like our emotions or our anxiousness and reflect on it, would suggest that we're not in a survival state under physical threat. Because if you are under physical threat, you're probably not going to spend a whole bunch of time thinking about your emotional experience, because your body's going to say, I need to be living and breathing. And so even to that existence, funny enough, like the idea of anxiousness over something is actually a privileged place to be because you're not under physical threat. And I just thought that was like a really interesting frame to consider. Like to your point, even just the opportunity that many of us have who would be on this call or that we kind of work with, that sometimes can feel very hard and tough to figure out.
Mhm.
Eleanor, for you, and then I'll go to you, Nicole. What advice would you give to leaders looking to create an environment where values and purpose are aligning, or even, because to me aligning isn't necessarily we need to all be the same. It means that
Mhm.
we're willing to go forward in the
Mhm.
expected actions. So from your experience, because I suspect even within the school system you might have very conflicting values and beliefs that might be held, So
Thank you for
how have
the
you solved the
information.
world's problems?
I know
What advice would
I'm
you
gonna
give us
solve the
though?
world's problems today. Yeah, it's a great one, and I'm glad that you said that, you know, there's this continuum of alignment, because I think we have to put this in perspective. That's important to really put that in perspective, because, you know, you're going to get partial, anywhere from partial, none, partial to full, and that takes time. It takes readiness. It takes a lot of intentionality. And I think the environment is really important in setting the context for how people get to a place of alignment in the values, right? So it needs, for example, for first thing, like if people are going to come there authentically to have open dialogue about what they believe, what their values are, what they believe, that guides them, then there has to be this inherent space built in, that's grounded in trust, right? And so if anybody
Mm,
comes to space, an environment that feels that is not trustworthy, it's not safe, it's not like physically, psychologically safe, then you're not doing yourself any favors. So that's the immediate, that's the first ingredient, right? There has to be a space and conditions built into the workplace where people can not only feel comfortable to express their values, whatever they are, and be able to hear and receive other people's information, right? So there has to be that context
mm,
to explore people's values. And I think in that, when you're setting up the context for that, you know, oftentimes, and I've used them in the past, is norms or agreements or guidelines for how it is that you are having and engaging in those critical conversations, because they are
mm,
critical. And you want people to enter and understand and feel rooted in productive and respectful talk. I think also with that, you know, you also need to have places, both formal and informal, that are set up. So you have to
mm,
organize spaces where you're doing, you know, intentional and purposeful work that people can see and feel and hear around values and its connection to the organization. But I also think that there's other opportunities to do that informally, right?
mm,
You can do that through affinity spaces in the workplace. And I don't know in a corporate context how readily available that is. I know in public education and public life, that is more and more commonplace, where you'll have spaces where people who hold identity that is similar or overlapping or intersecting can be in a space together and talk about shared value systems as it pertains to the organization.
mm,
And so how are you doing that kind of work as well? And then people have to come out of those conversations knowing and feeling that there's a direct connection to their own values and perhaps the purpose of the organization and how they're going to live those values
mm,
on a daily basis.
mm. Thanks. I feel like there's 100 more questions I could ask, but I've seen a fair number come in. So, Liv, maybe I'll pass over to you to invite any of the audience questions, as I know we're starting to get up on time.
Yeah, absolutely. The first one that came in was asking about, with the Canada Post strike going on with no end in sight, what is your take on this conflict? Is it a value slash productivity conflict?
Interesting.
Wow.
Mm.
Can it be both? I wonder if it can be both.
Why do
I
you say
think
that?
because I think the needs are there for both, right? It's, you know, we have values, and, you know, where people feel that maybe their values aren't being represented, and we also have that productivity piece where we've got to get things moving. I think it's interesting though, and I know, Jesse, you do more work, you know, kind of in unionized environments than I do. But one of the things that stands out for me, whether it's, you know, kind of this challenge going on with the current strike, or any, you know, kind of conflict within unionized environments, is that I sometimes feel we don't spend enough time creating systems for conflict resolution that prioritizes shared values and respect for differing values, and how
Mm,
do we do that? And I don't have you know, a magical answer for that. I just feel we don't give it enough space, and we don't create those systems that we
yeah.
need for effective conflict resolution.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd say, particularly what I see in the union is this reaction to discipline or, grievance even. Because I remember we were working with a group on creating some new behavioral commitments and norms, and one of the counterpoints of, because with the intention being, this now creates a reference for all of us to hold each other accountable. And one of the comments from one of the staff members was, well, if I do that, then the person I have that conversation with is just gonna file a grievance against me, and I might get like harassment or whatever. And like even in that, we missed it. That's actually a norm that's been created. That conflict, discomfort means I'm gonna go, in essence, like complain to mom or dad to fix the problem for me versus like sit in the discomfort. And also the accountability conversation doesn't need to be, you sit someone down and wag your finger at them. I think that's a part of the issue as well. It's also like, hey man, I've noticed you've been a bit late. Is anything going on? That's the start of an accountability conversation. Whereas I think we've intertwined discipline and accountability as the same thing. And understandably, we grew up in a lot of that as a cultural norm, was discipline versus accountability being something more you're instilling within another person to want to do better. Disciplines, I'm hitting a stick on you to change your behavior in many ways, I believe. Any others to jump out, Olivia?
Yeah, so we have wondering what sound bites would you offer or you would offer for folks who use in I'm sorry, I can't read today. I'm gonna try that again.
Mhm.
Wondering what sound bites you would offer for folks to use in terms of sitting with, accepting, and exploring new/different ideas that comes from folks who bring a culture add. And they're talking about people with different backgrounds, values, or beliefs. This to me is the core of truly creating a culture of psychological safety, meaning the behaviors where spaces are safe to share and have their ideas received.
Sorry, Libby, can
So
you read
big.
the first part of that question again? Just the
Absolutely,
first part. That
yes.
was a long one.
Wondering what sound bites you would offer for folks to
Mhm.
use in terms of sitting with, accepting, and exploring new or different ideas that come from folks who bring a culture add.
So I'll start off a little bit. I think that one, open-mindedness is necessary, right? That's an important ingredient in terms of um, participating in dialogue and understandings with people who don't hold the same identity as you, right? Because you have to intentionally, like, really move your brain to a different space and be ready and open to interrogate, explore, and ask questions without judgment and bias based on your own schema and experience, right? You have to grapple with things that conflict or rub up against your own moral compass or your own value set, and really sometimes we often talk about in education when we're doing this kind of work or sitting in discomfort, and that is a very difficult place for a lot of people, to sit in those spaces and that discomfort for a while as you're trying to learn more about different experiences and understandings and values that come into the workplace that are not shared, right? You have to be patient, you have to go slow. You might have to revisit a conversation 2 or 3 times before you get
At a
into
minimum.
a place, and before you get into a place where you one, understand, and 2, might have the courage, strength, whatever the word is, to go back and ask questions in a thoughtful way without the judgment and bias. And that perhaps is probably the biggest thing, because it's natural for us to want to lean on those biases, because those are things that we hold based on our experiences. We have to be patient with people as we're trying to learn and understand who they are, what they bring to an organization, and perhaps why they act or do the things that they do in a certain way, right? And so time, recognizing that it's a journey, and it's not going to happen overnight. And again, that's oftentimes where people, I think, falter or we get into trouble, is because we do want, as was said earlier, these kind of quick fixes, or we want to get to an outcome without really pausing and reflecting and thinking very thoughtfully about what people are sharing, in the
Yeah, I think what I was hearing with what you're saying there, Eleanor, is like be intentional about creating the container
Yeah.
for this to happen. I think so often I can remember a board meeting I was in where we were examining some of this stuff, and it was like a 5-minute agenda item within a series of other, and it's like this is not, again, if you want them to be something that's a real thing that is deeply embedded within the DNA of your organization or you as an
Yes.
individual, it
Yes.
requires time, dedication, and a willingness to be specific on the words you're choosing. I think so often it becomes like a line item on a series of other things or like a passing thing, to which then also um, increases the likelihood of unresolved conflict, upset. Whereas if we can be really good at setting the expectations of the container we're creating, I feel people enter that with an expectation that's more in line than being like almost sideswiped by something.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I
That
see one.
intentionality is a signal to people, right?
yes,
It's a signal about beliefs. It's a signal about what people can bring into a conversation and what might come out of it on the other side.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, I agree.
Before we close out, I just one question actually just came on that topic. Do you see or recommend pre-working with sensitive topics a long time in advance? Talking about creating the container just mentioned.
I think it depends. Like for me with values, and when I say depends, and I'll let you two jump in as well. I think too often we preach to someone else, this is what it should be, and not trust and empower the individuals to do it themselves. And so as a facilitator or as a coach with leaders, I don't imprint an expectation of this is who you should be on any of the people I interact with. We create a container of trust and psychological safety. So there's the vulnerability to explore the strength that's within themselves. And so, meaning like if you have even current values or you have new ones, I think it's a more effective approach to start asking questions and inviting conversation to bubble up. And then as you start to narrow down, then start to really hone in on like, well, what is this going to look like? I just kind of, I feel sometimes we get too much like training, then someone feels like this is happening to me, versus you might do the training later, but first start off as inviting questions and allowing people to share. Because the manipulative element, which would be like a more judgmental term of like how to influence people, is by doing that, they're now opportunity to download all of the stories and defensiveness that might come with a different idea. So there's some benefit to that from a neural sense of how do we influence people. But I just think like just from an operator, people want to see themselves in the thing that's happening. So let's let that go on versus tell everyone what it should be. I don't know, Nicole or Eleanor, you have a thought on that as well.
I do have a
Go
point, but
ahead.
I'm cognizant that Nicole hasn't spoken yet. So
No, that's okay. I just think, because I think I may be reading that question a little bit different, kind of pre-working the sensitive topics, a long time in advance. I think we have to define what sensitive is, right?
Yeah, that's
What
fair.
is sensitive to us and why is it sensitive? And I know that's sometimes a challenge as well. Is it because we haven't addressed something in past, or is it because we feel it's different from the values we hold? And is it just different, or are we, to Eleanor's earlier point, are we labeling it almost, with our own biases as right versus wrong? And I think we just
Yeah,
need to evaluate what is
yeah,
that sensitivity.
that's a fair point.
And I was just going to add, I think that, you do have to be intentional about, thinking through in pre-work proactively about setting up the structure, the conversation, the questioning, the approach with purpose. Because if you don't do that, especially if you're going to be doing something that is a departure from what we typically have done or conversations that we've particularly entered into, then yeah, much needed thought needs to go into that ahead of time, anticipating, knowing who people are and how they're going to enter in that space. I do think that you can mitigate that by, like you said, Jesse, allowing for and ensuring the voices of people into the construction of what that
Yes,
box looks like, right? If you
yes,
pose it versus if you collaborate to build it, that's a whole different
Yeah.
different approach, right? And when you invite everyone in the organization to have some participation or some hand in what the intentional development of that space is, doesn't matter if that's actually how it shapes out, but you need to at least invite the voices to the table if you think that
Yes.
you want to produce a productive approach that's going to resonate with everybody. If you just do it top down or hierarchical in nature, likely that is going to come out in a negative way on the other side.
Yeah. And I see a few really, oh, go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because I know we're wrapping up, but I
Yeah.
do want to invite, and Jesse, you can kick me for this later. I want to invite Benjamin to maybe reach out to Jesse or I. You've got some really great points here that I don't think we
Yeah,
can get into a
incredible
fulsome
ones.
discussion.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think, maybe Jesse and I having a conversation with Benjamin
Yeah.
might be really, because I think there's some great points in the chat from
Oh, I
Benjamin.
love it. Yeah, I love it too. I agree. Maybe as we wrap up, just because I don't want to avoid the tradition, recognizing some people may have to leave. But I am curious for both of you, and I'll give you like 15 to 30 seconds to give your answer. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received, or the worst piece of advice that you feel is so bad you need to warn us of? We'll start with you, Nicole.
Not really advice. Well, I guess that's advice, but not given to me directly, but it's actually from a quote from Maya Angelou, who I just love. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you've done, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that is how one of the values I just try to embody.
Nicole! Oh my gosh, we are kindred spirits, sister. That was
Was that what?
mine.
Oh,
Oh my
Come
God.
on.
I love that.
I love that. I love that. Like that is
Oh
what
my
I
God.
live by in everything that I do. It's so funny
Oh,
that you said that.
Oh, I love that.
That's
so just
amazing.
I love it.
were you actually going to share the same, Eleanor?
I was going to say the same thing. And the only other thing I was going to add, is because someone said this to me, stop trying to fit in when you are meant to stand out.
Yeah,
Love that. That's great. And the just like full circle validation that I've just received is I've been trying to curate an opportunity for you two to meet for like literally probably 2 years almost. And now that like that just happened, I'm like,
Yeah, totally.
anyways, thanks so much for sharing, and thanks for staying around to listen to the chat. Really, really appreciate it. We'll see you next month. Just to give you a heads up, we're with our guests for next month. We're fine tuning the details on when the event will be, so that the date might change slightly. But really look forward to that, and hope everyone enjoys a happy and healthy holiday season. And thanks again, Nicole and Eleanor, for taking the time to connect with us. Liv for even sitting in the vulnerable seat for a little bit at the front as well, and guiding us through the conversation. Thanks so much, folks, for a great session and time today.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.